Deep breath. I have been waiting years to tell my story, and oh, it's daunting trying to put everything together. I've been taking notes for several weeks now, just trying to organize my thoughts and what I wanted to include. The purpose of this video, I just hope and I think it could be helpful for so many, whether you are a victim yourself in the here and now, if you're a young teenager going through this, or if this happened to you many years ago, or if you are a parent that has a child that has gone through this and you're looking for answers or just trying to understand how this can happen. Really, this video is just helpful for anyone just to know kind of what to watch for and how this can happen so easily just in plain sight and how we miss these things. I'll reference later in this video a book. I don't know the author personally, but it's a book that I read fairly recently, within the last 2 years, and it is by Samantha Leonard, and it is called Groomed. And I love the subheading of this. It says, shining a light on the unheard narrative of childhood sexual assault. The unheard narrative. Oh, I have felt that just for so long. And I'll just start by saying, like, even when I was 13 years old, when my story became public, you know, the police have their checklist as far as, okay, what crimes does this hit? So they're really only interested in, you know, those kind of hardcore facts. You know, nobody asks the questions of how this started or how it got to that point. So really, this is the first time in my life that, and not that I didn't want to share this, I've been like screaming inside, like, I want the world to know, hey, this is how this happened. And it's just one of those things that isn't told when victims are asked either for their statement or for their story. And I just think it is so important, especially because, you know, part of the thing as a victim, when you come across something else that resonates with you, you're like, oh my gosh, that happened to me too. There is healing in that. And it just helps to take away so much confusion. And I'll share that as I had that part of like my breakthrough when we get there. So this is not to shame my perpetrator in any way. That's not my heart in this, even though I am still very angry with him. I'm not sharing this to try to be like against him. This is purely, I just want to help and get my story out there and help others through this. So I tried to break this down into kind of categories that would make sense as far as what the grooming process looked like for me. You kind of have those beginning stages where there's really no red flags, and there's like a middle ground that's kind of like, okay, things are a little weird, and then it gets full blown. So when it was toward the end of 6th grade, this family moved into town, a married couple. They had 5 children, 4 boys, 1 girl. The girl was very close to my age, and we became good friends. And the father, the perpetrator, was on, you know, joined the worship team at our church. I attended a fairly small church. I would say the congregation maybe 100 or less. But you know, I had attended there since age 6. That was our home church. So this guy had a very fun-loving attitude. He had the outlook of, you know, I never want to grow up. You know, just always fun, always, you know, playing with, you know, the kids and teens and whatnot. And he had 5 kids of his own, so that perfectly, you know, blended in fine. He also, so our church had a youth pastor, and then this individual also joined on as a youth leader, volunteer of sorts. And so this first process, he spent building trust and a relationship and a friendship there. they didn't raise any concerns because he was just seemed to be like that with everybody. So I didn't notice at the time that there was, he was treating me like any differently than anyone else. So there was no concern there. I would just describe him as a friend and father figure. One of the first kind of weird things was we were sitting there and he said to me, hey, when you get married, I'll be there for you and I'll walk you down the aisle, insinuating that he would kind of replace, the role of my father, who was still very well alive and living. My dad actually did walk me down the aisle at my wedding, years later. So that was kind of weird, and I think that was his kind of emotional manipulation to kind of said to me like, oh, he really cares about me. And at that point in life, young teenage girls, like, that's what they want. They want to feel cared about. They want to feel accepted and loved. So that was a good feeling for me. I did spend time at their home. As I said, they had 5 children, ages at that time 4 to 16. And if I was like 11 or 12 at that point, his daughter was 12 or 13. We were very close in age. She was one grade ahead of me. And I remember like back rubs were very acceptable and then the norm there. People just giving each other back rubs. It wasn't a big deal. I just didn't think anything about it. He would give us back rubs. We would give him back rubs. No eyebrows raised there. So I didn't realize, looking back at this now, obviously it makes sense, but so he was trying to find times to be alone with me. So I know that there was a time after church, my mom had said that it was okay if he had given me a ride home. I only lived like 2 miles from the church, and he lived like 20 minutes away from the church. And my mom said that it was okay because his daughter was there too, no big deal. A friend's dad giving me a ride home with both kids there. Well, what he did is he took both of us and drove the 20 minutes to his house and dropped his daughter off first, so that he then had all that time alone with me to take me home. So obviously, his daughter being the same age, I guess, that didn't raise any red flags or questions with her. It just, that's what happened. So again, just very in plain sight. Nobody thinks anything of it because it just wasn't seen, but that's what he did. When I would sleep over their house, everyone's bedroom in the house was upstairs. I slept downstairs in the living room on the couch. And I remember one night I woke up and it kind of startled me because he's sitting next to me, like in the dark. And he's like, oh, I was just here. He's like, I was praying for you. Okay, everyone can do their eye roll now. But I didn't think anything of it. I'm like, oh, that's nice. He really cares for me. So then, that turns into a back rub. And I don't know if it was the first time or later down the road, but then those back rubs turned into him going under the shirt for a back rub. So kind of just slowly starting to push those boundaries. There was a Friday afternoon. I must have needed somewhere to go just between when school was over, and I was in the marching band at that time. So I would have to be back at the school that evening for, the football game. So I had my band uniform that I took to their house. Well, here it comes time to leave, and I can't find my band uniform. And so his wife was like going out of town or something, and he's like, oh, did you need that? I had put that in my wife's trunk. Like, oh my gosh, so coordinated, so manipulative. So obviously I couldn't go to the game that night because I didn't have my band uniform. So now that kept me, at their house, and he had time, longer with me. As I've mentioned, he was on the worship team. I was also on the worship team, even though I was, younger, like 7th grade at this point. My mom played the saxophone on the worship team, and I played the flute. So I would say there's maybe like 5 or 6 of us on the team. And before service would start, we would go back into, they call it the Sunday school office, just this really tiny office, and we would get in a circle and pray and hold hands. Well, he would always make sure that he was standing next to me so that he could hold my hand. Again, in plain sight, but nobody thinks anything of it, just because they're not really watching for it. But without fail, every Sunday, he made sure he was right next to me. I had mentioned that I was in a band. So our middle school was just like 3 blocks away from the high school. So we had band like the last period of the day. So anyone that was in the middle school, we had to walk up to the high school because that's where the band room was and where the entire band would practice. So once he learned of that, he began picking me up on the days that I had band at the middle school and giving me a ride the whole 3 blocks away to the high school, again, just looking to spend time with me. And I look back now and I'm like, you know, where did your wife think you were on these days? And I don't know that end of it, but again, I don't know who's really accounting for where he is on stuff like that. On Wednesdays, I had piano lessons downtown. I did not live like in town. You know, I had to take a bus to get into town for school. So on Wednesdays, I had piano lessons after school. So I would walk to piano lessons, and then I would have some downtime before I would just meet up with my mom at the church, which was in town later that evening, which wasn't a big deal. You know, I had friends that lived in town and could walk around town, no big deal there. Well, he would meet up with me and also some other friends. I remember one time we were at the public library just hanging out, and again, in plain sight, in public, and nobody questions it. You know, his daughter wasn't there, wasn't his kids. I think it was me, him, and at least one other of my friends. And again, just in plain sight. And then also on those same Wednesdays, I would get to the church early. So there was a creek that went in front of the church and a little bit of a bank that went like down a little bit to the river. So I would hang out there, you know, until church. Well, he started meeting me there in public, in plain sight, just him and me, like sitting down by the river. I guess nobody saw this stuff. At football games, again, back to being in marching band. So during the third quarter, the marching band had their break and we were free to roam around or do whatever. So he would come so he could hang out with me during the third quarter. Very, very in plain sight, because my friends were also there and they just thought he was, you know, hey, somebody's cool dad that was like hip and fun to hang around with, and there he was in plain sight. So that's kind of, you know, laying the groundwork. You know, maybe that went on for a year. These people are very calculated, very manipulative, and very patient. You know, that's how they get away with this. That's how they gain the trust. So starting into that middle ground area, there was a youth group trip where we went skiing. And, you know, I was there with friends, you know, having a great time. And I'm coming down the hill near the lodge. And one of the employees approached me and said, "Oh, somebody was looking for you." And I said, "Oh," and I described our youth pastor, and they're like, "No, that wasn't it." So then I described, you know, this other guy, the youth leader volunteer, my friend, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he was looking for you." So he had actually gone outside to find an employee, gave them my description to flag me down to send me inside to him, because he saw this as a perfect opportunity to spend some time alone with me. So me being a teenager and one of the leaders of the group is looking for me, I'm like, okay. So I take my skis off and go in the lodge, and I find him, and he's sitting alone at a table, you know, just in the cafeteria. You know, we're not like really off to the side or anything. We're in the middle of, you know, if you've been in a ski lodge, lots of tables, lots of people, lots of activity. So we're sitting in there, and he just starts, you know, we're just kind of talking, conversing. I don't think anything of it. And then he starts to get weird and like tell me about like personal details of his life, as far as, you know, he's not really happy in his marriage, they don't really have a good sex life. I'm like 12 years old and I'm just like, okay, like what do you say, what do you do? It was really awkward. But again, he's just starting to push those boundaries to try to get me comfortable about talking about these things. And again, you know, by that point we're really good friends, so I'm just like, okay. So that was one of the things. Another one, looking back at this now, I know it was totally coordinated, totally planned on his part, but so it was I was staying overnight at his house, you know, for a sleepover with my friend, his daughter. And at some point I had gone upstairs to get a shower. Not a big deal, didn't think anything of it. Well, then I come down and he pulls me aside to tell me and to apologize, saying that he had gone outside to take the dog out and he had accidentally seen me naked because the bathroom curtain had been left open. I guarantee you he opened it earlier in the day. And he felt the need to apologize to me, to tell me that. Oh, so many things. There's no reason to have to tell me that. Again, very coordinated, very calculated. If he just wanted like a free show, he could have done that as well. But he went out of his way to tell me that he saw me naked. And then he apologized, you know, just to smooth things over. And in my mind, okay, super awkward, super weird. I'm super embarrassed. But it wasn't one of those things where like, oh, I need to go tell somebody. Like, he was being nice and just letting me know that this happened, and he apologized. And one of the major turning points that I can pinpoint, so teenage girls, when you're in 7th grade, you know, it's fun to, you know, flirt with boys your own age. And one of my friends had made these kissing licenses. So like they were just pieces of paper, and it was kissing licenses she handed out to some of her friends, and it was, you know, cute and funny for a 12, 13-year-old, you know, just having fun and giggling with the girls. But when you read this license, so it gave like very like PG rated instructions for a kiss. And then at the bottom it says something along the lines of, if you read this, you must kiss the owner. So it was a Wednesday night at a church, you know, service, and I was hanging out with his daughter, and we were laughing about this kissing license, and we were looking at it, and he comes over, you know, hey, what are you laughing about? So me and his daughter are both standing there, and we both like hand it to him to show him, and he laughs and hands it back. But then later that same evening, he pulls me aside and says, when do I get to cash in on that? And that was the very first time in all of this that finally that red flag went up, that like, hey, this might be crossing a line. But being the age that I was, I liked the attention. I knew that he cared for me very much. So I let it at that. And I just craved love and attention that just kind of let it go. He then started slowly pushing the bounds of, you know, in the physical aspect. We had gone somewhere. It was him, myself, his daughter, and his oldest son, who would have been about 16 at the time. So his two kids are in the back seat. I'm in the front seat, and he's driving. And it was at night. And the car was one of those where the front seat went all the way across. So if you're sitting in the back, you know, the seat is all the way, you know, you can't, your visual is here and above. So sitting up front, he reached over as the driver, and we're holding hands with his kids in the back seat. You know, I'm speaking to you victims. I completely understand. I craved the attention. I craved the love that he was showing me. I was all about it. I was smitten. I didn't know any better. You know, as an adult, when we realize this, we're super angry at ourselves. You know, I ask myself all the time, like, how could you be so stupid? Don't. You know, it's not your fault. It's completely normal to feel that way, and the perpetrators know that, and they'll play off of that. And then, so I haven't really chewed gum in years. I don't know if they still do this, but in packs of gum, like there would be 5 sticks of gum, and in one, there would always be one that would have like a black line inside the wrapper. Like 4 would be blank and 1 would have a black line. I have no idea why. That's just what it was. And the thing is you would exchange those between people, saying, you know, you wanted a kiss. I don't know who comes up with these things. But anyway, so there began to be an exchange of like those wrappers between us. And then youth convention, which would have been around April. It's always like Easter weekend when we would go. That is when he made his move sexually, and it was made right under the noses of lots of people. So we're going to youth convention in, we had taken several vehicles. We had a fairly large group, several leaders. We were in a 15-passenger van, and in this van there were 2 leaders. There was the youth pastor was driving, and then this man was in the very back seat with me. And I know it's hard to fathom, because like these days I think churches do a better job of just being on top of these kind of things and being like, absolutely not, like that is a no-go. But that it was what it was. So we're in the back seat, and there's people right, you know, in the row in front of us. It's a full van, and you know, sometime during there, you know, he reaches his hand over, undoes my pants, and he has his hand down my pants, and then he takes my hand and does the same to him. And I'm just like frozen and didn't know what to do, couldn't say anything. Like, I almost think it was his plan to do this in a van full of people. Like, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna say? I can't go anywhere. Am I gonna be like, excuse me, and like say something? So so then I would say within like 20 minutes of that, you know, we arrived to we were going to Hershey, and it's so crazy. Like, we stopped to take a group picture, and I had this picture at the beginning, you know, on this video, and I'm gonna show it again. And it's unbelievable that this moment in time was captured in a picture. It's crazy. So when you look at this, I have blurred out everyone's face, including his, except for mine. I left mine there because I want you to see. This is like, youth convention was always such a fun time. You know, we're hanging out with friends. It's supposed to be just a great time. So when you look at this picture, I am completely isolated. Like, all of my friends are on the other side. I am standing over with him. My body language, I am slouched down. His daughter is in that picture, you know, way on the other side, but she's there. And he's just standing like nothing's wrong, nothing. And I look at that and I can tell you, you know, his shirt is untucked. His shirt was not untucked when that trip started. But I look at that picture and my heart breaks for that little girl, because that moment was frozen in time in this picture. And that was just like, that was the hour that everything changed. And again, I can't believe that I have this picture that captured that moment. Very sad. So after we arrived at the hotel, we got out of the van, and he is like secretly on the side, just apologizing profusely to me. I'm so sorry. That will never happen again. I'm so sorry. I'm like, okay. But really, he's just apologizing because he doesn't want me to tell anybody. So, we check in and go up to our hotel rooms. The guys are with the guys, girls with the girls. And I remember being in my hotel room, and I'm in there with other, girls my age and the women leaders. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I got over the door and I looked out the peephole. He is sitting on the floor across from our door. I have no words. I don't know that anyone else ever knew that. I don't know that anyone saw him. No one was leaving our room. Where are the other male leaders to realize hey, you're missing one, and he's sitting outside the girls' hotel room? I mean, if I had to guess, he was probably trying to listen in to make sure that I wasn't spilling my guts and telling anyone. So I think once he was sure that I hadn't told anyone, sure enough, next time we're in the van, same thing happens again. And he apologizes profusely again. So that keeps happening until he realizes he doesn't really have to apologize anymore because he's confident that I'm not going to tell anybody. So we get back from youth convention and he gives me a card. And in the card, he invites me to meet him in the woods near my house. And he says in this card, I will bring a pillow and blanket so that we're comfortable, and something else that you may or may not want me to use. That's what the card said. He was referring to a condom. So I did go and meet him. It's hard to put myself back in that mindset, just because now I absolutely know better. I do think that for a while I did want to go meet him. Again, I was just entranced in the whole relationship of things. He had told me that when I turned 18, we were gonna get married. He knew that I liked log cabins, and he was always giving me log cabin magazines, putting those ideas in my head, that dream of this is where we're gonna live, and things like that. So I was falling into that. So I did go and meet him, and we had sex very first day I was there. The next day I go, he is sitting next to a tree with a backpack and a rope, and he tells me that he was going to hang himself because he was afraid I was going to tell someone. Once again, once he's sure that I'm not going to tell anyone, okay. I mean, he had no intention of hanging himself. He was just all about the emotional manipulation, which is why, I had a counselor tell me once, it might have been easier to process had it been a violent rape or attack, because I never felt that I was forced per se to do anything. And it made things very confusing and very hard to process and understand. So those meetings continued. He had told me that if I was to get pregnant, he had already done his homework. He had found an abortion clinic in a few towns over that didn't require ID, and that he would just pose as my father and we would go there and I would have an abortion. I am so thankful that that never happened, because I probably wouldn't have known any better. And I mean, obviously this is already overly traumatic, but to add that on, if I would have been forced to secretly have an abortion at age 13 by this man, I can't even imagine. But again, just things are that coordinated in his head that he just has it all figured out. Part of the brainwashing, he told me the Bible didn't apply to us. I was a Christian, still am. He used the age gap of celebrities that I was familiar with. Celine Dion and her husband have a really big age gap, and he used that one specifically to say, this is okay. At the time I was 13 and he was 41. So there was a 28-year age gap. So he had convinced me that that was okay. It's just not everyone would understand, so I couldn't tell anyone. He would tell me to bring my book bag to church and leave it under, a seat. And he would put in Cosmo magazines for me to read, because he was, wanted to, again, push those boundaries of me learning about different sexual things. And there was one incident at we're in youth group, sitting around the edges of the room, and I was sitting here, he was next to me, and his daughter was like over on the other side. And I wanted to say something to his daughter, and I, kind of leaned over him to say something to her. And right there in the middle of the youth room, he's cupping my breasts as I leaned over his, leaned over his lap to say something to her. Right in the middle of youth group. Like, the arrogance, just unbelievable. There was another instance, I don't know what the night was or what we were doing, but there was several youth there. I don't know if it was a youth event, and he was the only leader there. Again, I'm not sure why or what was happening, but he decides that we're going to play this lights out game. So it's nighttime, and we're downstairs in the church. So if you turn out the lights, it's pitch black. So I don't even know what the game entailed or what the idea was, or some sort of hide and seek. I just know that when those lights went out, he was kissing me in the church with other youth around, like, plain sight. He had his own phone number. This was the day, or this was, the days before cell phones were super popular. And again, I'm just asking myself, I don't know. I don't know why his wife didn't question, like, why he needed a separate phone number. He certainly didn't have a job that required it, but he had a separate phone number that he could safely, call me, or I could call him, and he was the only one to use it. A couple years ago, so I used to be a camp director, and I was at a training, and we were learning about, when you're hiring staff, and then, what to be watching for, because the kids' safety always number one priority. And what they said was something that made so much sense to me. They said, you're never going to catch somebody abusing the child. You will catch them breaking rules. And since I could see both sides of, what he was portraying to people versus what was actually happening, that is absolutely true. Little things were caught here and here, but that was it. So an example of that, so this is after people started to question. I think some things, people were starting to raise an eyebrow. So he was a little bit on thin ice with the youth pastor, and was kind of told, you are not to be alone with any of them, kind of thing, especially me. I think people were starting to notice. So we went on a day trip, and it was, this place had like a lodge, and they had like an indoor pool, and there was a lake, ping pong, I think, just different things like that. We were free to, do whatever and hang out and play for the day. So what he did is he got a boat, like a rowboat, and he took me and one other friend, a female, friend, so me, him, and two teenage girls, and he proceeds to row the boat across to the other side of the lake. He's not alone with anybody. So we get to the other side of the lake, and we get out. There's like a little beachy area, but there's no one else around. So we're swimming and playing and having a good time. And, he puts me on his back, like piggyback style. So the water is probably like up to, his chest or whatever. So if he's standing here, the other girl that was there was standing, in front of him. And then I was on his back piggyback style. So underneath the water, he's got his hands up and, doing sexual things under the water. But the girl that's in front, can't see any of that. So we get back to the lodge, and the youth pastor is livid. But this man, the perpetrator, here comes the cocky and the arrogance, profusely, like, up and down, like, I didn't do anything wrong, like, calm down, blah, blah, blah. Ridiculous. It came to a point where I think enough people were questioning him. And, so, I mean, he was on the worship team of the church, so there must have been, he had a microphone and was up in front of the church. And one night, he took it upon himself, and I was there, because I remember this, and he gives this speech to the entire congregation. And he's like, I just feel like many of you are attacking me and coming at me, and all this, and again, just profusely up and down, like, you have no right, I'm completely innocent of any of these things, like, again, just the arrogance. Oh, because I was, between him and me, like, we were the only two in the room that knew that was absolute BS. But he could stand up in front of an entire congregation and say otherwise. That's how cocky they are. I got to a point that I was just finally so sick of him. So the youth convention weekend, so that was like Easter, and us meeting in the woods happened over the summer between my 8th grade and 9th grade. And when I started high school, I really just started to lose interest in the relationship. I just wanted to be a teenager. I wanted to flirt with guys my own age. And actually, freshman year, I had a boyfriend that was, attended that same high school as me. So I really just wanted nothing to do with him anymore. So in my mind, like, we broke up. I broke up with him. I'm like, we're done. I'm over it. I don't want to do this anymore. I was just going to take the secret to my grave. Figure, okay, this is done. Go on living life, whatever. And he, ramped up the emotional manipulation, just always teary-eyed and the puppy dog eyes, and he began stalking me. And finally, I had told a friend, I didn't spill my guts by any means, but I had let slip, and I don't know how purposefully it was, but I let slip, just enough that they knew something was up, and they went home and told their parents. And I remember, so this would have been my freshman year, April 1st, because, so that person went home, told their parents. Their parents called both my dad and the pastor of the church to come over and be like, hey, we need to tell you something. So they called my dad, and my mom came out to me and she's like, did you play any April Fool's jokes on anybody today? And as soon as she said that, I knew. I just knew, and my heart stopped. Like, the secret was out. So I remember, just sitting down with my parents and told them, yes, I've been having sex, and they're like, with who? And I couldn't say it, and I think one of them said, with, and they said his name, and I said yes. So at that point, my dad, went downtown to meet with the other set of parents and the pastor. And my mom, very smart, and she said to me, she's like, do you have any proof? Which is a very legit question. In our world, this is one of those things that could come down to he said, she said. And I went to my room, and I did have like a trunk that I had kept locked, and in there was letters and notes and cards and jewelry and all types of like little gifts and trinkets from him. So I mean, there was no question. So the next day, I didn't go to school. I was at the police station instead, answering questions. And again, the questions had nothing to do with how this all happened. They just want to know the end result, to know like what things can we charge him with. I remember being told, I think my mom told me, that his wife had asked the church for help with bail money. And again, to a victim at that age, that just adds to the confusion of, okay, they're asking the church to help this person because I have put them in jail. You know, it's a lot to process. I don't know if the church did help them or not. Like, I don't even want to know. But I do know that he was, you know, out and about in public again, between things being made public and him actually being sentenced, because he was still stalking me. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh. So he knows my bus route going to school, and there is a parking lot, you know, with like a shopping plaza kind of thing. Well, all the stores are like over here. His car is parked right here, facing where the bus comes past. Nobody parks over here. The parking lot's over here, and he's right there with the hood up on his car because his car broke down. It wasn't broke down. Guaranteed. I'm livid. As soon as I get to school, you know, I call my mom. She calls the police. You know, they go down there. Of course, magically, their car must have started working and he's not there anymore. But, you know, again, just stuff like that. I'm just like, oh. So, life goes on after that. He is sentenced 5 to 10 years in prison. He did end up serving the entire 10. I think he was out at some point, but violated his probation and ended up back in or something, but served his 10 years. My heart does go out to his family. His children, very nice, very sweet. You know, they didn't ask for this. They didn't deserve this. So that was hard. You know, no one wants their father to be taken away from their children for 10 years. Like, that's a big gap. And so that's hard to process, but this was not my fault. So even after this, I had no idea what the grooming process was. I didn't know that this was a thing. I didn't know that I had been conned. I just thought that this was like a really bad idea of a relationship. I didn't want counseling. I didn't want to talk about it. I was fine. You know, I didn't know that there was anything I needed to talk about. You know, just leave me alone. And 2 years later, I'm watching a daytime talk show. I don't know which one it was, but they're talking about the grooming process. My jaw hit the floor. I just could not believe it, because everything that they were mentioning happened to me like to a T. And it still baffles me. Like, do these guys like all read the same training manual or something? It's just, oh, it's crazy how these stories are all like so similar. And that was a huge turning point as far as like the healing process of just finally understanding what had happened, that I had been manipulated into this. And I didn't realize that before. So that's why I had mentioned when I talked about this book, Groomed, when you come across similar stories and you're just able to connect on that level of like a complete stranger and knowing like the same exact thing, like just different things. Like, obviously everyone's story is different and yet they're the same. So again, even though like I read this like recently within the last 2 years, it was, you know, there's a part where I think like she's riding her bike and he's stalking her, and I'm like, holy crap. Like, so, you know, speaking to the victims right now, like this is a great book just to connect with a similar story. And I really appreciated this book. And also in this book, it talks about how, you know, how much the wife stood by the husband, the perpetrator. And that's hard, you know, again, as a victim. And you'll have this. A lot of times these perpetrators are very well liked in the community, and people just have a really hard time processing that they've really done this, that they're, you know, that they, I'm sure people think like, oh, well, she probably came on to him and he just had a weak moment. And I think that's one of the main reasons I want to share my story. This was planned and coordinated so far in advance. To the parents, if you think that your child might be caught up in something like this is just my personal opinion. If you question them, you might catch them at two different time points. As far as if you question them, they will stick up for the offender honestly. You know, if someone would have questioned me about my relationship with this person, you know, early on, I would have stuck up with him honestly. You know, hey, he's a great friend. I can trust him. You know, he's never done anything, you know, inappropriate. And at that time, that was the case. But then there's that when it switches over. And then if you question them, they will cover for them because they've hit that brainwashed point where things have become inappropriate, but they've been convinced that they can't tell anyone. So it's very tricky. Let me tell you, and this is to the victims and also for the parents to understand, there will be lifelong repercussions from this. It alters the brain. You've been through something so traumatic, even if it didn't feel like it. I did not fully realize the impact that this had on me until 20 years after it happened. Oh, and so it was these last few years that I really was able to dive into, you know, struggling with all these things and didn't understand why. Well, you know, it tied in more than I thought it did. You know, counseling was provided to me free when it first happened, but I was still in the mindset of like, I don't need this. Didn't know what to talk about just because I didn't even understand what had happened. And I don't know, like it might have been a different conversation if the counselor had said like, do you fully grasp like this is a thing here? And in college, as I was struggling with some things, I reached out to this county where it had happened to say like, you know, is there still funding available for victims for counseling? And they apologized and said, I'm sorry, you've passed that window. It's so wrong. So, you know, I had tried to get some help, but you know, as a college student, you know, didn't really have the money to really pursue that. I struggled with anxiety, depression, pornography addiction, which I've done a whole other video on. I'll link that below in the description if you're interested in seeing that. Low self-esteem. I have this obsessive need to be in control, which makes sense because as victims, you know, we obviously never want to be taken advantage of again. So I need to be fully in control of things. And, you know, talking about like the self-esteem, I never connected the dots. Like one of my big takeaways from this without realizing it was feeling like I wasn't worth protecting. So that continued throughout like my entire life, just thinking I don't have much worth, not much value. I remember, so back in, you know, my freshman year of high school, and this was after he was already sentenced to prison. And so I'm sitting in, it was a computer lab classroom, and so his wife, you know, working, you know, making ends meet, she was a substitute teacher, and she walks in and she's the teacher, and I just like, what do I do? I thought about like just getting up and like leaving the room and going to the counselor's office, but what would I say? Be like, okay, this is a long story, but I'm not comfortable sitting in this room, like just all these things going through my head. That's not something that should have been put on me to have to deal with. Like, somebody dropped the ball. Like, and again, it wasn't his wife's fault either. And, I'm sure it was just as uncomfortable for her, and I just sat there quietly. But again, it was just one of those like traumatic moments that is no one like paying attention. And it just said to me, like, this wasn't a big deal. Get over it. You won't see me doing any videos on forgiveness anytime soon. I'll just be completely honest. Yes, I'm a Christian. Yes, I believe in forgiveness. I haven't been able to get to that point yet. I spent many years thinking like, hey, this wasn't a big deal, blah, blah, blah. And these last couple of years, when I've really finally gotten the help that I needed and processed this, I think it's important to feel that anger. I spent a lot of time feeling nothing. So, working through those emotions and processing them, I'm okay with my anger right now. Right or wrong, I don't know. But I definitely haven't gotten to the forgiveness stage yet. It's on my to-do list. I think as part of the healing process, we have to face what was done to us, and we have to feel that anger. So with this particular individual, he's out of jail, living back, with his family. And I do worry, because he still lives in the same town where, some of my family lives. So when I go back home to visit, he's just not someone I ever want to bump into. But, still know some of the same people kind of thing. He is on the Megan's Law sex offender registry. So a couple of years ago, I had heard, there's a different church downtown that he was involved with. And somebody recognized that he was on the sex offender registry. And they asked him about it. And his answer to her was, oh, that was just a misunderstanding with a 17-year-old. That is not okay. And there's not a thing I can do about it. Like, I'm not looking to get re-involved and try to ruin his life in any way. But again, going back to that, you never catch an abuser abusing, you catch them, breaking rules or little lies here and there. So while someone else just might be like, okay, that's valid, move on, I call BS. I call absolute BS. Especially because right now he is, his job is in ministry, and through music and prison ministry or whatnot. But you're not even being honest about your story. Like, it doesn't sit right with me. So I try not to judge, try not to whatever, but that almost like boils my anger even more. So talking about court action, something I did not know also again until the last couple of years. So there's criminal action, which you should absolutely take, and that holds him or her accountable criminally. They'll go to jail and be held accountable for those charges. I didn't realize until a few years ago, you can also sue them in civil court. And I had this conversation with, my parents, and, they had considered it, back then when it had happened. But my dad, he's like, what would have been the point? So they didn't at that point. And I'm almost glad that they didn't, because this is something that I want to stand up and do myself. But depending on what state you live in, there are, the windows close at certain ages, and I am past the age to be able to take that action. There are, they're trying to pass right now that a 2-year window would open up so that anyone that wanted to take that action would be able to. A lot of people are against it because, I say a lot of Christians are against it, because a lot of churches are going to have to pay a lot of money in these lawsuits. And again, I am a Christian. I attend church. But there needs to be accountability here. So I am not against taking it to court. So in my counseling, my counselor asked me, why do you want to take this to court? And it wasn't one of those like, well, why do you want to take this to court? It was, you know, she wanted to make sure that I was doing it for the right reasons and in the right mindset. And so I actually, in my journal here, I have my reasons. And actually, a lot of these reasons are the same reasons for doing this video. So I have here, number 1, I want my narrative out there. He has twisted the story. I want to tell my story and its impact. Number 2, encourage others not to be silenced. You are worthy of protection. Number 3, fight for my inner child. Take control of a situation where I previously had no control. And number 4, to bring closure. So in terms of civil court and a lawsuit, this is something, so I wrote this down word for word off of, you know, the internet somewhere, but I found it very, very helpful in explaining just kind of the mindset or what to be prepared for if it's something you want to consider. It says, most of us walk around with a somewhat romantic idea about justice, about having our day in court, where the real truth will come out and we will be avenged for the wrong done to us. Although this does happen, and people can theoretically come away from the process feeling this way, it is also often a grueling process that can leave you feeling like it all came down to a throw of the dice. On the other hand, the case may settle rather quickly and leave you with a check in your hand, wondering what to do with your cherished fantasies of revealing at last to all the world what kind of person your perpetrator really is. That is not to say the process will also be empowering. The old saying, no pain, no gain, is definitely applicable. Standing up for yourself over such a personal and traumatic event is never easy, but survivors who have the courage to sue the responsible for their childhood abuse are taking control of a situation where they previously had no control. And I thought that was very helpful in terms of just understanding why someone might want to pursue that avenue. And I think they also are working on changing the laws. I'd mentioned the 2-year window, and the reason that they're considering that 2-year window is because overall they are looking at it's extending. Like, you had to, if you were abused as a minor, you only had to like age 30 to take that action. And if you missed that window, then you were just out of luck and could never do that. But what they're finding is these victims aren't realizing the full effect that this trauma has had on their life until like many years later into their life. You know, which is kind of, you know, happened with me. I struggled with all these things and I just didn't realize the full impact or tie everything together until recently. But their court systems say like, oh, you missed the window, sorry. So I don't know, we'll see what happens with that in the future. But in the meantime, I'm just so happy to be able to share this with you, and honored that you have been here to listen. And I hope that my story has been helpful to you. So thanks.